Okay, let's jump right in because honestly, the story we're diving into today sounds completely made up,
Mm.
like something out of a bizarre movie plot. We're talking about the cocaine hippos of Colombia.
It really is one of the strangest conservation tales out there. I mean, where else do you see the legacy of international drug trafficking directly causing a major ecological crisis with, of all things, hippos?
Exactly. It's this wild 40-year saga.
Hmm.
You've got these massive sub-Saharan African animals, not just surviving, but actually thriving, totally unchecked in South America. And now there's this huge crisis brewing in the Magdalena River system.
Yeah.
So our goal today for you listening is pretty straightforward. We want to unpack how on earth these animals got there in the first place, why they've done so incredibly well, multiplying like crazy, and what this whole mess tells us about, well, the unexpected impact one person's actions can have on the natural world.
It's a classic, if extreme, example of unintended consequences, isn't it? You know, human hubris kind of colliding with nature, finding a way. And the result is this incredibly complex ethical and biological puzzle.
Definitely. So let's start where it all began, the origin story, right? To understand this, we have to rewind all the way back to 1981. This is Pablo Escobar at the absolute peak of his power and his wealth.
Right. Escobar had more money than he knew what to do with, literally. And he decided he wanted this extravagant private zoo for his daughter at his huge estate, Hacienda Nápoles, which is located between Medellin and Bogota.
And we're not talking about, like, goats and chickens. He envisioned his own slice of Africa.
Oh, absolutely. He flew in giraffes, rhinos, elephants, zebras, a whole menagerie. And critically for our story, 4 hippos. Just 4 to start with, 1 male and 3 females.
And they were kept in this big, custom-built pond
Yeah.
right there on the estate grounds.
And given the whole context, this, who owned them, how they got there, the sheer absurdity of it all, they pretty quickly picked up that nickname, the cocaine hippos, or sometimes narco hippos.
But that whole era, Escobar's reign, came to a violent end in 1993 when he was killed. The Colombian government took control of Hacienda Nápoles, and suddenly they had this massive, bizarre problem on their hands.
Yeah, what do you do with a private zoo full of exotic, potentially dangerous animals?
Well, for most of them, like the giraffes and elephants, they managed. They were eventually captured and moved to proper zoos elsewhere in Colombia. It wasn't easy, but it was doable.
But the hippos. Oh, the hippos were different. See, by 93, that initial group of 4 had already grown. There were maybe 16 of them by then.
16 hippos. They're huge. They're notoriously aggressive, and trying to capture and relocate that many, it was deemed just too difficult, too dangerous, too expensive.
So they made a decision, a really fateful one in hindsight.
We just left them.
They basically just left them in the pond. The fatal assumption was, okay, they're African animals, they're out of their element, surely they won't last long here. They'll probably just die out eventually.
Wow. And that assumption couldn't have been more wrong, could it?
Catastrophically wrong. And this is where the story shifts from, a weird historical footnote to a full-blown invasive species crisis. The authorities just didn't realize how perfect the Colombian environment actually was for hippos.
Because Hacienda Nápoles isn't just some isolated spot. It's
Wow.
really close to the Magdalena River, right? Colombia's biggest river.
Exactly. And the hippos didn't just stay put in Escobar's pond. They started exploring, following the local streams and waterways, and pretty soon they found their way into the main Magdalena River system.
And that environment turned out to be even better for them than Africa in some
But
ways.
in key ways, yeah. 2 massive advantages. First, unlike many parts of Africa, there's no harsh dry season in the Magdalena Basin, so there's always plenty of water and vegetation, year-round resources.
Okay.
And second, and this is crucial, there are 0 natural predators for hippos in South America. Nothing hunts adult hippos even in Africa, besides maybe lions occasionally taking a calf, but here, absolutely nothing. No checks, no balances.
So you've got perfect habitat, unlimited food and water, and no predators. It's a recipe for it.
Exponential growth. That little herd of 16 didn't stay little for long. They started spreading out along the river. Today, the official estimate is somewhere around 160 hippos.
160 from an initial 4.
Yep. And they've been spotted as far as 100 kilometers away from Hacienda Nápoles now. They're really expanding their range.
And the breeding potential is just staggering, isn't it?
It really is. Think about this. They can start reproducing when they're just 5 years old. A female can have a calf roughly every 18 months or so, and they can live for like 50 years.
So the projections, what do they look like?
Well, they're pretty alarming, frankly. If things continue on the current trajectory, some models suggest that within the next 25 years, we could be looking at a population of anywhere between 800, maybe even up to 5,000 hippos.
5,000 hippos in the Magdalena River. That's
Yeah.
that's unthinkable. That's no longer a quirky problem. That's a national ecological disaster waiting to happen.
Exactly. And we have to remember what kind of animal we're dealing with here. They aren't gentle giants. Hippos are incredibly territorial, and they are genuinely one of the most dangerous mammals on the planet. Statistically, only humans and, well, dogs cause more human deaths, though the dog statistic is more about disease transmission.
Right. And they attack viciously, trampling, goring with those huge tusks. They've been known to bite off limbs, even heads. It's brutal.
Absolutely. And as the hippo numbers grew and they spread out, inevitably they started coming into conflict with local people, especially fishermen, people who depend on the river. Attacks became more common.
Which forced the government's hand eventually. There was that incident in 2009, right, with
Yeah.
Pepe.
Ah, yes, Pepe, that was a turning point. By 2009, the conflicts were escalating. The government decided they had to do something about a particularly aggressive male hippo nicknamed Pepe who was causing a lot of problems. They authorized a cull.
They sent in the military to handle it.
They did, and this is where the whole thing blew up, ethically speaking. After the soldiers killed Pepe, someone took a photograph, the soldiers posing, with their machine guns, next to the dead hippo, like a trophy hunt.
Oh, no.
And that picture went viral. Instantly, the public reaction was just furious. Animal rights groups, environmental organizations, even just the general public, there was this massive outcry. People were horrified. It was seen as barbaric.
So the backlash was huge.
Immense. So intense that the government immediately had to backtrack and put a complete halt to any plans for further culling.
So that one photo, that single incident with Pepe, basically took lethal control off the table.
Pretty much. It completely shifted the narrative. It wasn't just an invasive species problem anymore. It was suddenly this incredibly charged ethical debate. Is it right to kill these animals, even if they're invasive, especially given how they got there? The public was really divided.
Okay, so if culling is out, what does that leave? The authorities had to kind of reassess everything, right? Look at the actual ecological impact, the pros and cons of having these giant African mammals permanently established in Colombia.
Exactly. And surprisingly, there were some arguments put forward for potential positives, though they're definitely controversial.
Like the rewilding idea.
Yeah, that's the big one. Some researchers floated this really interesting kind of radical idea. They pointed out that South America, tens of thousands of years ago, actually did have its own massive herbivores. Things like giant ground sloths, glyptodonts, huge animals that went extinct around 10,000 years ago.
So the theory is that hippos might be accidentally filling that void.
Kind of, yeah. That maybe they're stepping into that empty ecological niche of a large, semi-aquatic, mega herbivore, potentially restoring some ecological functions that have been missing for millennia. It's a bold claim, a bit speculative maybe, but it's part of the conversation.
And then there's the money, right?
Oh.
Ecotourism.
Definitely. For the local communities around Hacienda Nápoles along the river, the hippos, despite the danger, have become a bit of an attraction. There are boat tours, hotels, observation decks have topped up. They bring in tourist money, create jobs. So it's complex for the people living there. It's both a threat and, for some, a livelihood.
It's easy to see why it's such a messy debate then. You've got potential, maybe theoretical ecological benefits, plus real economic activity.
Absolutely. It muddies the waters. However, it's really important to stress that the vast majority of scientific evidence, especially as the hippo numbers climb, points overwhelmingly towards the negative impacts. The cons vastly outweigh any potential pros.
And the biggest problem seems to be, well, their poop, basically.
What?
The toxic poo effect, as our sources called it.
That's a pretty accurate, if blunt, way to put it.
Yeah.
See, in small numbers, hippo dung can actually add nutrients to the water, which might benefit algae, insects, fish, birds, It can be enriching.
But we're way past small numbers now.
Way past. When you have 160, potentially soon hundreds, of these huge animals constantly defecating tons of waste into the river system day after day, you get a massive overload of nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus.
And that triggers Algae blooms.
Huge, uncontrolled algae blooms, especially in the slower moving connected ponds and lagoons along the main river. The water turns thick and green.
Okay, but the real damage happens when the algae dies.
Exactly. When that massive amount of algae dies off and starts to decompose, the bacteria doing the decomposing use up almost all the dissolved oxygen in the water. It's called eutrophication.
Creating dead zones.
Massive aquatic dead zones, oxygen levels plummet, and you get these huge fish kills, sometimes wiping out almost everything in a pond practically overnight.
And that's particularly bad because those ponds are important for the river's fish populations overall.
Critically important. Many of the local river fish species use those very lagoons and ponds as nurseries, safe places to lay their eggs, and for the young fish to hatch and grow. If those nurseries become toxic, low oxygen zones, well, the fish recruitment for the entire river system just crashes. It impacts the whole food web.
Wow. So it's not just a localized problem in the ponds.
Not at all. And it's not just the fish either. Remember how territorial hippos are? They actively compete with and threaten native Colombian wildlife that rely on the same river habitat. Things like river otters, capybaras, even endangered species like the West Indian manatee. Hippos will drive them out or even attack them.
And it damaged the land too,
Mm-hmm.
just by walking around.
Yeah, it sounds minor, but multiply it by hundreds of multi-ton animals over decades. Their sheer weight compacts the soil along the riverbanks and in the wetlands where they graze. That compacted soil makes it really hard for native plants to establish roots. Over time, this could contribute to erosion and even localized desertification of those sensitive riparian zones.
Okay, so the ecological damage is severe and widespread. And then there's the fear of them spreading even further.
That's the nightmare scenario, really. Right now, thankfully, the sources suggest they're mostly contained within the Magdalena River basin. Geographically, the Magdalena is still quite isolated, about 700 kilometers, from direct connections to other massive river systems like the Orinoco or, crucially, the Amazon.
But if they ever did manage to cross over, maybe during extreme floods or by finding some unexpected connecting waterway,
The impact could be catastrophic on an entirely different scale. Imagine hippos establishing themselves in the Amazon basin. The damage they could do to those incredibly diverse ecosystems, threatening hundreds, maybe thousands of unique endemic species. It's almost unimaginable. So yeah, the negatives are overwhelming.
which brings us back to the what do we do question.
If culling is off the table because of the public reaction and ethical concerns,
Then the main option left for controlling the population is sterilization, specifically castration for the males, as it's generally more effective for population control than sterilizing females. But that sounds incredibly difficult with hippos.
oh, it's a logistical nightmare. An absolute beast of a task. I mean, just think about it. First, it's incredibly expensive. You need large, highly specialized teams, vets, capture experts, support crew.
Okay.
Then there's the animal itself. Hippos have skin that's what, 2 inches thick? Trying to get a tranquilizer dart through that into the muscle effectively and safely, it's really challenging.
And they run for the water when they're scared or hurt.
Instantly. That's their defense mechanism. So you dart a hippo, it bolts for the river. If the tranquilizer takes effect while it's underwater, it can easily drown. There's a very real risk. You have this tiny window.
And even if you manage to sedate it safely on land, the surgery itself isn't simple.
Not at all. Unlike, say, a bull or a dog, a hippo's testicles aren't external, they're retained up inside the body cavity. So it's not a quick field procedure, it's major abdominal surgery.
Which has to be done right there, basically,
what?
on the riverbank.
Often, yes, under challenging field conditions. They have to perform the surgery, close everything up, and then monitor the animal as it wakes up, hoping it gets back to the water safely. It's complex, dangerous for the hippo, dangerous for the team, and incredibly resource intensive.
So trying to castrate enough males to actually make a dent in a population of 160, growing fast, it seems almost impossible.
It's daunting, to say the least. Given the scale and the difficulties, the Colombian government finally, in 2023, announced a more concrete, large-scale official plan. They're committing serious resources now.
Okay, so what's the plan?
It's sort of a multi-pronged approach. First, they aim to capture and relocate a significant number. They're targeting 85 hippos to international zoos or sanctuaries willing and able to take them. That's a huge logistical challenge in itself, finding homes and transporting them.
85. That's a big chunk. What about the rest?
For the ones remaining in Colombia, the plan is to ramp up the sterilization efforts significantly. The goal is to capture and surgically castrate 40 male hippos every single year moving forward.
40 a year. That's incredibly ambitious, given the difficulties we just discussed.
Hugely ambitious. And the estimated cost is astronomical. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars over the long term. But the government has stated the goal clearly. This is necessary to save the native endemic species of the Magdalena River, to try and undo the damage caused, ultimately, by one man's whim over 4 decades ago.
It really is an unbelievable story. A conservation crisis unlike any other, born entirely from, well, the ego of a single individual.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, of how small actions, private decisions, can ripple outwards with massive unforeseen consequences for ecosystems.
Definitely. And something that really sticks with me, something for you listening to think about, is that mention in the source material about unknown snowballing effects. If these hippos, even mostly contained in one river system for now, can cause such profound damage, wiping out fish nurseries, pushing out native manatees, changing the very chemistry of the water, what does that tell us about the hidden long-term risks of any major species displacement, even ones that seem geographically isolated initially?
Yeah, it raises deep questions about ecological connectivity and tipping points, and maybe about accountability, too. What's the true cost? The cost that might only become apparent generations later when human actions, whether through curiosity, commerce, or just sheer hubris, like in this case, disrupt the natural order. The ripples from Hacienda Nápoles are still spreading, and they'll likely shape conservation in Colombia for a very, very long time.